Hi, my name is Rick Brown. I've been researching and collecting the Lincoln assassination for 48 years now. As so often happens when you're researching one topic, you find an interesting tidbit about another related topic. That's why I put together this little-known facts about the Lincolns and the Civil War. This presentation can be customized to last anywhere from 20 minutes to a full 2.5 hours. Following this are just a few examples of interesting and fascinating facts that I have come up with about Lincoln and the Civil War. Robert Todd Lincoln is the only son of the Lincolns, Mary and Abraham Lincoln, to live to adulthood. He's also the only person in history, probably history of the world, that has had ties to 3 presidential assassinations. Of course, the only connection with his father getting shot and assassinated was that it was his father. But 20 years later, Robert Todd Lincoln was Secretary of State for Garfield. He was present when Garfield was assassinated. 20 years later, he was Secretary of War for William McKinley, President McKinley. He was present when McKinley was shot. At that point, he basically threw up his hands in the air and said, "I'm not jinxed of politics and presidents. I'm getting out of politics." So he moved on. He did get a job, and he was president of the Pullman Railroad Company until he died in 1919. There's also a strange coincidence about the people in the box the night that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Within a few years, everyone in that box was either dead or in a mental institution. Of course, Abraham, he died the next morning. Mary Lincoln, her son Robert Todd, had her committed to a mental institution. Major Rathbone was fiancé to Clara Harris at the time. Shortly after the Civil War ended, they did get married, and for whatever reason, they moved to Paris, France to live. Well, one night, he comes home from work, has an axe, and he axed Clara Harris. So she's dead. He was committed to a mental institution. And of course, John Wilkes Booth, almost 2 weeks after the assassination, he was shot and died. Although he wasn't in the box that night, Boston Corbett is the man who shot and killed John Wilkes Booth. He fell at ill fate also. After the Civil War, he got a job as a doorkeeper at the Kansas State Legislature. He went along okay for a few years, but one day while the legislature was still in session, he comes running down the aisle, firing off 2 revolvers and shouting, "I'm going to kill you all." They managed to subdue him, and he was committed to a mental institution for the rest of his life. For this segment, I like to call it the post-mortem career of John Wilkes Booth. In 1872, a man was lived by the name of John St. Helen was living in Texas. He thought he was on his deathbed, so he confessed to his landlady that he, in fact, was John Wilkes Booth. After the assassination, he managed to get down to South America, where he stayed a few years, and then he came back to America under an assumed name, John St. Helen, and lived his life as a normal person would. But, as fate would have it, he didn't die. He did get better. So he figured, I better get out of town. So he left town. In 1903, he crops up again, but this time in Enid, Oklahoma, under the name of David E. George. He confesses, you'd think he'd learn, he confesses to his landlady, because he thinks he's on his deathbed, that he in fact is John Wilkes Booth, South America, etc., etc. Well, this time he did die. So the local newspaper did carry the article about his death and his claiming to be John Wilkes Booth. Meanwhile, it was picked up nationally. because the undertaker was like, hey, if this is John Wilkes Booth, we don't want to just bury him, we want to preserve it for historical sake. So the undertaker mummified John Wilkes, what's supposed to be John Wilkes Booth's body. And he had it standing up in a coffin on Main Street, in the picture window on Main Street, so people walking by could say, this is John Wilkes Booth. Maybe strum up business for him. Well, a man living in Memphis, Tennessee, by the name of Finis Bates, read the article, one of the articles in his Memphis newspaper, and he's wondering, well, so he goes up to Enid, Oklahoma. We don't know how much, but he managed to purchase the mummy from the undertaker, and he tried putting it on the circus, taking it around as like a circus sideshow exhibit. But despite being on the road or various different sideshows, he wasn't really making that much money. So he sat down and wrote a book, The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth, telling the whole story, partially made up, partially what others had told him from Enid, Oklahoma, to help promote. But in the meantime, one of the major circus promoters approached him and bought the mummy and put it in their own sideshow. This is Finis Bates. You see his name up there. The unfortunate or screwy part of this is Finis Bates at the time, when he bought the mummy, was the Assistant Attorney General for Tennessee. So he quit his job to go on the sideshow circuit with John Wilkes Booth, the mummy. Oh well, to each their own. Again, another picture of the mummy. You'd pay your dime or your quarter to get in to see it. It did remain on the sideshow circuit from about the 1920s to at least the 1960s, possibly the early 1970s. The mummy ended up being in a gift shop on the wharf in Seattle, Washington, that I saw in the middle, like bicentennial year, 1976. I don't know if it's still there. But the thing that gets me, yep, that's John Wilkes Booth. I mean, how can you, okay, he's got a mustache. That's about it. We've all seen the movie The Wizard of Oz, how many dozens of times? Believe it or not, this carriage, when they're taking the tour of the Emerald City, was Lincoln's private carriage. It was also used in the movie with Judy Garland and Meet Me in St. Louis, and a couple of the Andy Hardy movies. As I said in the beginning, this presentation can be customized anywhere from 20 minutes to a full 2.5 hours. Thank you for watching.